Welcome to episode 3 of the Leading Complexity video podcast. This is where we explore the art of leading organizations in today's complex, hyper-competitive landscape. In each episode, we will explore cutting-edge strategies with some of the foremost thinkers in leadership. Join us and discover how to make your organization thrive and lead in a constantly evolving world. My name is Tomas Björkholm, and with me I have Göthe.
Yes, and in this episode we will listen to a very interesting conversation with Erin Meyer. She's the author of The Culture Map and the book about Netflix, No Rules, Rules. Thomas, how do you know about Erin and her work?
I have read her books and I really like them. Also seen her in a couple of YouTube videos. I also seen her live once, even though it was on a distance. But and I think she's a great speaker, first of all, really good. And I find her topics very interesting. She's talking about culture, which is fascinating me, both organizational culture, but also culture between different countries. When I was preparing for the interview that we will soon see, I had kind of come up with some questions I wanted to ask her. I sent them over. But then when we connected, we started to chit chat a little bit. And she talks about, she's really fascinating, even then, talking about a lot of things. And she was talking about how she was working together with Reed Hastings from Netflix. And I just understood that, wow, this is so much more interesting than the questions I had prepared. So I asked her, could we change the questions? And she said, yeah, let's go for that. So that is what we will see in the video soon.
Yes, so I'm really intrigued myself to hear about the questions. So let's have a watch and see them.
So hello everyone, and welcome to this interview with Erin Meyer. Happy to have you in the program, Erin.
Nice to be here with you, Thomas.
It's awesome. So you're famous for 2 books, one about the culture map, and now also on this Netflix description, I would call it, No Rules, Rules. So I think we should focus on the new book because it's really interesting. And you wrote this book together with the CEO of the company, Reed Hastings, and I'm curious. Could you tell us a little bit about how it was to work together with him and how you come up with all the content in the book?
Yeah, so this was actually a big project. So I met Reed in 2017, and he's someone who he really believes that the extremely unorthodox and, let's say, strange organizational culture that they have at Netflix is what's driving and has driven the success of that company. So we decided that, I mean, my first book was about national cultural differences. We decided that we would work together to write another book about organizational culture, and specifically about how to develop an organizational culture that breeds innovation and flexibility, and that I would conduct this big research project and spend a lot of time with him in order to figure out what it was that they were, what the magic was that was happening in Netflix culture that was leading to their success that other companies could learn from. So that was, it was a big project. I worked on it for about 3 years. I talked to Reed weekly. I saw him every 6 weeks for more interviews. I spent, I did over 200 interviews with current and past employees. And it's interesting because, like, now, Thomas, when you look at that book, I think it seems kind of simple, right? Like, okay, there's these like 3 categories. I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then I have to do this, and then it comes together. But in truth, the employees and the executive team and Reed himself all knew, like, they had these kind of like lots of stories they told, lots of sayings, things that were driving their behaviors, but they didn't know the way that they didn't really understand themselves how the pieces fit together. So that was the complex part of it for me, was trying to figure out like how can I take like all of this kind of these different attributes of this culture and figure out, you know, why and how they work together, and then put them in some kind of model or system so that other organizations could learn something from them. So that took about 3 years in the end, but yeah, it was a lot of fun, complex fun.
I really love the book, and everyone listening to this, please read it, or as I did, listen to it twice so far. You can learn a lot from this, and the thing that I think is really interesting is that it's actually out there. I mean, if you want to be the next Netflix, you could just read the book. If you want to be the new Google, you could be just reading their book, and Amazon have their book, and you can read and look at videos about Spotify, how they are working, or about how Tesla are working. It's all out there, but do you see anything that kind of they have in common? Do we have the recipe for success here?
Yeah, well, I think with those specific companies that you've just mentioned, I mean, each of them has a different organizational culture, but what's similar about each of them is they're all culture-driven organizations. And what I mean by that is that like the executive team is driving the behaviors in the organization through the culture. And I've been doing a lot of research on this. I just wrote a new HBR article about it, looking at other companies, like what's going on in these specific companies who have managed to get the culture driving the success of the company. What are they doing that other companies are not? And what I've seen is, okay, like, I mean, the vast majority of companies who try to kind of articulate their organizational culture, to debate and articulate their organizational culture, they're really focused on what I call absolute positives, which are things like, oh, we're all about integrity, or we're all about respect or communication. And of course, those are great words. I mean, who wouldn't want to have integrity in their organization? But I call those absolute positives because there's no good, credible option to them. Like, I mean, never have I come across an organization that said, here, we are all about corruption, right? There's just no good option to integrity. So what I've seen with companies like Amazon or Google or Netflix is that they're really instead articulating their organizational culture by wrestling with tensions. So they're really thinking like, what are the tough dilemmas that our talented, well-meaning employees are facing on an ongoing basis? And, you know, in our organization, when our employees come across this dimension or this dilemma, which way do we want them to turn? And then if they can get that figured out, then they can articulate that. And then that really impacts the decision-making in the organization. So one example is now starting to be known and repeated by other companies, but you brought up Amazon, is this disagree and commit. And I love that. I mean, it's, I think you can just see the tension. You can just see the dilemma right in it. So that's all about that. Of course, if I, as an employee, disagree with a decision that my boss is making, should I verbalize it? Should I fight for what I believe in against what, let's say, leadership or my team believes in? And disagree, and of course the dilemma is right there, right? Like, well, I could do it because I believe in it and I think it's right. Or I could keep quiet because I value my job and I want to make sure that I'm not keeping the company from moving forward in general. But so disagree and commit, it tells us, it says, okay, you know what? You should disagree as strongly as you feel it up until the decision has been finalized. And then once the decision has been finalized, then you should stop disagreeing and you should, you know, jump on board and commit. So you can really see the tension right in there. Or at Netflix, one of the things they say is, we are a team, not a family. Okay, well, there is the tension, the dilemma is right there. And of course, on a team, in a family, we want to really focus on like having a warm, long-term caring ethos. But what goes along with that also is, of course, if you're doing poor work and you've been doing poor work for a long time, you know what, you can stay because this is a family. On an Olympic team, we've got a totally different kind of ethos. It's a lot more, let's say, a lot more fast paced. I'm really focused on making sure I always have excellence in every spot. So I think that's what we can see. And yeah, I don't know why more companies are not focusing on those dilemmas or tensions, but I do think that that's something that any company can learn from.
Yeah, I really love in your book when you're talking about this tension between like spending, where you first talked about, well, spend it as it was your own money.
Yeah.
But that doesn't work because we all have different understanding what that means, and maybe I'm willing to spend a lot on my computer or my dinners or whatever it is, while maybe that is not the best for the company, and so. I think that's the best with the book, actually. So
Yeah.
we talked about this. You said something about why other companies are not following this. What can we do to make them follow? I can see a lot of. I'm from Sweden, so I'm of course caring a lot about the Swedish companies, and I see a lot of old, big Swedish companies that are totally not understanding the importance of having a strong culture, and talk about those dilemmas instead of just putting nice words on t-shirts. So do
Yeah.
you have an idea what can we do to help those companies to understand the importance of having a strong culture?
Yeah, so I mean, I think my kind of overarching learning from all of this was just to recognize how the vast majority of companies today are operating with this industrial era hangover. And what I mean by that is, of course, during the industrial era, we were all obsessed with error elimination, consistency, and replicability. And if you are leading a manufacturing plant today, or you are working in some kind of safety critical industry, those are still your goals, right? Consistency, replicability, error elimination. But in a growing number of companies and organizations today, the biggest risk is no longer losing out on a little bit of efficiency or making some mistakes. The biggest risk is now not thinking freshly enough or being creative enough so that we become irrelevant, right? So I think what's happened is that the vast majority of companies, they still have this industrial era mindset. And with the industrial era mindset, we have a lot of control mechanisms that are in place in order to control our employees' behaviors. So we have policies telling people what they can and can't do. We have processes telling people, who you have to get approval from to spend this money, or if you want to make this decision, who has to sign off on it. And we have just lots and lots of guidelines telling us, how we have to work. And in truth, if we are a controlled process-led organization, then I don't think you need to be a culture-led organization. You can have the controls lead the company. But if you desire to move to a more, let's say, agile work environment, an environment that's more innovative, creative, and flexible, which allows you to be also faster moving and to change more quickly as the environment changes, then you need to find a way to let go of these control mechanisms in order to give your employees the space to run free. That leads to more creativity and to more speed. And when you let go of those control mechanisms, you have to have some other way of coordinating your employees' behavior and driving the success of the company. So often people, I think, they think, oh, well, how would I operate without those controls? Like, how could I possibly have an organization where we don't have a travel policy, or we don't tell people how they can spend money, or we give all this decision-making freedom to our employees? Well, you can't just let go of the controls. You have to replace the controls with culture, right? So I think that's the question. Do you want to be an industrial era company where you lead with controls and process, Or do you want to be, more innovative and more flexible, where we lead with culture? And that's where we can learn from these companies who are more, let's say, on the edge, on the cutting edge of this understanding of a company for our new age.
Yeah, I love that. I usually say that culture is making sure that everyone understand that what behavior gives you patting on the shoulder and which behaviors gives you someone slashing your hand. I mean,
Yeah.
that's help. So it's much better than control. I really love your answers, and I'm looking so much forward to your session in the Leading Complexity program. So happy to have you in the program again.
Thank you so much, Thomas. Really looking forward to it. Looking forward to being with everybody.
Oh, that will be awesome. Thank you very much for this interview as
Take
well.
care.
Take
Thanks.
care. Bye-bye.
That was very interesting interview, and she's very knowledgeable when it comes to culture, and she has a unique approach to kind of avoiding the pitfalls. She talks a lot about these absolutely positives when it comes to culture. Thomas, could you kind of expand what does that mean?
I actually asked ChatGPT for the most common value words, which usually is how culture in a company is expressed. And the list I got was starting with integrity, respect, innovation, collaboration, excellence, customer-centric, and diversity. And I think if you ask the listeners here to just shout out if you have at least one of those in your culture words, I expect almost everyone to do that. And the problem with them, as Erin is saying in the interview, is it's not really solving any dilemma. It's not helping us anywhere, because there is not really a choice between being respectful and not being respectful. Like, it's like, how should I do this? Should I be non-respectful or respectful? That is so obvious, so you don't need to talk about it. And I think she's totally right when talking about we need to solve the dilemmas, find the things that people are making the wrong decision, and then be clear about what is the right decision. That is how I interpret that word.
Those things are so obvious that it's not really helping anyone to kind of having those generalized words on this high level.
No, exactly. She also mentioned the HBR, the Harvard Business Review article. I think you have read it. Maybe you can give us a quick summary of what it is about.
Yeah, I can really recommend it. It's quite short and to the point, and she explores further on this working with the absolute positives as a pitfall, and she kind of concludes with kind of 3 steps for a recommendation, and the first is using these real world dilemmas. So that is something that actually helps you in the daily decision making. So will this value help me in a day-to-day situation? So starting with those dilemmas, kind of listing, identifying dilemmas. Secondly, then is to have a dilemma test. So make this actionable. So if you have an abstract value word, how do you make it actionable? And then to do that is to have a dilemma test. So coming up with examples of day-to-day decision-making situations where you can actually apply this. So she brings up one example from Pixar, for example, and that is they have regularly share unfinished work. So they had the problem with people kind of wanting to polish things and make it really good before they gave feedback, thinking that was a nice way not to kind of waste people's time, and also not being vulnerable sharing unpolished work. But of course that delays the whole feedback process. So if you have a value of regularly sharing unfinished work, it's quite clear that you're expected to share that. And thirdly then is kind of paint that culture, those words in a vivid picture, so that kind of people reminds it, and it becomes part of your daily work and make it stick. She brings up the example of Amazon's the 2 pizza rule. So if you remember that, then you know that you shouldn't have bigger teams than can be fed on two pizzas.
I so much recognize myself because I have much easier to remember a picture than I have to when I try to remember words. So she's also mentioning something she says called in this industrial area hangover. I see this as like what you sometimes talk about, organizational depth. What are the typical organizational depths that you see?
Yes, so in the traditional management, we have so many management processes, a lot of finance processes, HR processes that are kind of focusing on control. And when things are complex, we tend to kind of increase more processes to get more control. But that's kind of counterintuitive or counterproductive. The better thing is release control, and then we need to get rid of a lot of these organizational debts or unnecessary processes and rules, etc. So I've done multiple workshops where people kind of ask them to list things that are not kind of contributing or that are getting in the way, and typically you get examples like a lot of reporting structures, lot of status meetings, or meetings in general that are unnecessary with kind of unclear agendas, unclear purpose, and who really needs to be there. Something that always comes up is also kind of extra over cumbersome budget processes, and especially when you connect budgets to initiatives or projects, then you become really kind of slow moving. Resource management, like allocating people on detail levels and trying to move people around using that. So those are examples of rules and processes that are not longer serving us.
Yeah, you mentioned some of my favorite hate objects, I would say, like status reporting meetings. They very much end up in more like bragging about what I did yesterday and just taking a lot of time for people instead of just having the status in front of you. You could visualize that and you can talk about it where you see something that is not correct. And you also mentioned project budgeting, which some people and I am one of them. I think that is the root of a lot of the problems we see in the companies today. So were there any highlights in this video that you would like to mention?
I think she gave a lot of examples of this kind of how to work with tensions. So make the values kind of actionable and tangible. So another example she brought up was also from Amazon was this disagree and commit. So yeah, if it's complex, we cannot all have the same view or come to consensus, but it's really, really important to get everyone's opinion. So your job is to disagree, to kind of bring up your perspectives, and then, but also when you have a decision to commit to it. So I think that is a great example. And another example is she said that Netflix, they had a value of family in the beginning, but realized that they wanted more performance culture like a sports team. So they shifted from family to team. In a family, you don't fire your siblings or children, right?
You don't?
But you want on a sports team, you want high performance. You want to kind of put the best team on the field and do your best, and you have to give straight feedback. You have to practice. You have to improve, and sometimes you have to also change teams. So that made a big change for them.
Yeah. One thing I would like to highlight is this something that is really showing the difference working in a more traditional world, a more something you can predict rather than working in a complex world. Because in complexity, the biggest fear is not to do something wrong. It's actually doing something that is not interesting enough to find new customers. So becoming irrelevant, she's mentioning that, that the big fear should be not becoming relevant in the future. Do you have anything else?
Yeah, I mean that the best way to avoid fear is to kind of, or avoid risk, is to do nothing, or just do within your kind of limit or your budget, or keep your budget so it's not risking anything. But to innovate, it's about taking risks, and if it's a more complex environment, you have to take risk.
Yeah, so the fear should not be about making mistakes. It should be about not making mistakes.
Exactly. Because then there's no learning.
Exactly. Anything else?
Yeah, I think also this replacing controls with culture. So that what's the alternative then? If you don't want to control or micromanagement, or kind of have a really rigid processes, the alternative is actually working with culture. But then to do, as she says, avoid those absolute positives or those kind of generic buzzwords that doesn't kind of make any practical impact. So if you use the culture, but you have to make it tangible, actionable, and really practical, then you can kind of reduce controls, reduce rules. And I think this is a trend that there is. For a long time, the Valve, the gaming company, their handbook has been super popular, showing kind of very lightweight handbook. And also some time ago, Tesla's handbook came out. They call it the new handbook, and it's kind of super simple. You just have a few kind of really rigid rules, but very few.
Really interesting. What I would like to highlight at the end here is the idea that actually the organizational culture at Netflix is what driving the success of the company. It's Reed Hastings saying that, and I think that is so true, that culture has become like the secret recipe for success. And we have seen this from more companies, more successful companies, especially from the Silicon Valley, like Google, Amazon, and Tesla. And I also think that we have seen it from Toyota and the lean. But the problem is that I don't think we really have understood that it's a culture that is driving Toyota. We believe it's all about the process. And I think that is a mistake we are doing. So we need to become successful today. We need to start looking at our culture and see that as the recipe for success.
Let's wrap up for today. We're curious about your comments and reflections, so please share that in the comment section. You will also be able to ask questions to Erin Meyer. She's the teacher of a masterclass in our Leading Complexity program coming up. It's the November 21st. So go to leadingcomplexity.com to get your tickets there. Thanks for listening.
Thank you.